Welcome, lords and ladies, back to the realm, and to another scripted video. I am your host, the Goat King. Have you enjoyed those unscripted videos going into the Starfinder playtest? I can produce those much faster, but I believe my scripted videos are a higher quality. Regardless, it is time to continue our journey through the elemental planes. Today, that journey brings us to the plane of metal. We previously explored the plane of water, and coming into the plane of metal, you will quickly notice a change of attitude. Where elemental water is focused on cycles and currents, elemental metal is maybe not focused on, but certainly aware of its inevitable yet distant end. As with other elements, metal also hosts distinct schools of its elemental magic. Wall is the discipline of strength and of knowing when to hold firm, and when to flex, when to break. Blade, as you might guess, is the discipline of destruction. Spoke is the discipline that represents tools in all their myriad forms, and the change those tools can be used to produce. Conduit is the discipline that collects, focuses, channels, and deflects power, be that the flash of a lightning bolt or the authority of a monarch. As you can see, the power of metal has deep connections with society and societal advancement. The plane itself is still re-emerging, taking its place between water and earth, where it sat long ago before it, like the plane of wood, was untethered from the elemental cycle. When I first entered the plane, I was immediately struck by the landscape, or metalscape, around me. The vastness of it, for I could see a great distance, was dotted in spires of metal. Every metal I can name was represented, as well as many I have yet to learn the names of. There were many mountains of scrap, and great twisted flowing sculptures of liquid metal, each held in place by the plane's numerous and convoluted magnetic fields. A compass would be little use here, as even in places where the needle stops spinning, even a few steps will vastly change its reading. From the tippy tops of structures, be them spires, scrap mountains, or liquid metal arabesques, bolts of lightning can regularly be seen to stretch hundreds of miles across the sky. The smell of ozone is therefore ever present. The most shocking feature of the landscape, however, was visible on the horizon. In the distance, the ground distinctly curved up, as if it was the internal surface of a sphere. The view of that distant landscape is only cut off by what lies in the sky, a second smaller yet still unimaginably vast sphere of soft white light that illuminates the plane. If there is a recognized ruler of the plane of metal, it is the elemental lord Laudinmio, the sovereign of alchemy. Their edicts are to discover new alloys, maintain many plans, and innovate how metals are used. Anathema to their nature is to allow your creations to be used maliciously or destroy an alchemical formula. Laudinmio was considered a flexible and charming leader, but long ago, the Earth Elemental Lord Irzul invaded the plane of metal and stole from Laudinmio a portion of their authority over metal. Laudinmio's sovereign nature was wounded by this theft, and now they spend most of their time locked in sleep, their waking hours plagued with regret and confusion. Their home, Castle Amalgam, is an inverted pyramid who sits in the center of Lake Everchange. It is run through by tentacular carbon coils, the results of experiments gone awry but never wrong. As much as ever, the castle still reflects its master, now clearly damaged from the long-ago conflict with Irzul. Laudinmio's most loyal followers were once organized into the Euphonious Coalition, but they were ordered to disband shortly before Laudinmio fell into stasis. Despite this order, Sarek, a Zura of great renown and the current leader of what remains of the Euphonious Coalition, still champions the cause, to spread science, art, and culture throughout the plane and beyond. His musical skill is well regarded, and he frequently visits the city of Argyrus to perform at the Alcalodion. Argyrus is the grandest city on the plane of metal, and perhaps one of the oldest, as it was once considered the home of all Zuras. Whether due to its age or scale, Argyrus has drawn the most skilled smiths and metalworkers from across the plane. The clamor of the work earned the city its affectionate nickname, Ring City. Home to the city is a mercurial named Alahadak, known across the multiverse as the most skilled adamantine smith to ever work metal. The waiting list to procure their services is so long it exceeds the lifespan of most mortals. Speaking of adamantine and mortals, Ring City was built atop a continent-sized deposit of that very metal. Over the years, miners, almost exclusively Talos, have tunneled so much of the deposit they are on the brink of forming a second city. And the formation of new cities on the plane is a common occurrence, as many of its residents are quite taken by the practice of architecture. Mercurials especially. They have a tendency to build an entire city before completely abandoning it to start a new one. A surprising star in this community is the metal scamp Mangagia. Most metal scamps live with little other purpose than destruction and mischief, but Mangagia has become one of the most respected architects on the plane. Her designs have become some of the most iconic in not just common cities, but also Argyrus over the last 10,000 years. You might wonder how there's any room left unpaved if the Mercurials have been building cities non-stop for tens of thousands of years. The answer to that lies in the plane's second elemental lord. Faramnestra, the Lady of Rust, is a colossal crustacean with a shell of rusted metal. Her edicts are to accept the inevitable, clear away ruins, and usher the past into obscurity. Anathema to her nature is to preserve obsolete knowledge or rebuild ruined structures. It is Faramnestra's divine task to progress the plane's slow march to its inevitable end. She carves a path of desolation across the plane as she slowly marches, consuming all in her way. Despite this, she is not cruel. She moves slowly and does not divert from her path to cause needless suffering. I would not recommend staying near to watch, however. She is followed by a host of Orlice who feed on all that falls just outside her path. Orlice can be aggressive, and she pays no concern to their actions. One type of phenomenon blamed on the Lady of Rust is the deserts of rust. These are vast tracts of land covered in so much of the fine red powder that it forms dunes. Those who make this claim are ignorant. Despite her title, Faramnestra's consumption is so complete she leaves not even rust in her wake. The dunes of these deserts are pushed not by wind, but by the force of floating magnetic spheres. This makes the unmoving spires all the more obvious. These spires are suspected to be the remains of towers whose cities have been buried by the rust. Old cities that may yet contain valuable antiquities. And if you could just get down there, it should be free for the picking. After all, who could live under a desert of rust? In stark contrast to these buried cities, and definitely inhabited, are the soaring isles. All across the plane, magnetically levitated islands of ore float through the sky. These islands range from a mere few hundred yards to being miles across. The drift of these islands make them as useful for trade and piracy as they are for reclusive mages or nobility. And regardless of the specific denizen, most choose dirigibles as their favored transport off of and between islands. The magnetism is great enough, it even allows metallic beings to comfortably live on the island's underside. It is for all these reasons that, despite the value of their ore, these islands are rarely ever mined. If you haven't noticed by now, the plane is highly electrically and magnetically active, from floating islands to arcs of miles-long lightning. All that power must be coming from somewhere. The copperwood is spread hundreds of miles across the base of the southwest mountain range. Copper trees with photovoltaic leaves and a superconductive root structure that underlays the whole plain. No, this is not merely a pleasant sight to behold, a tranquil woodland of gleaming metal trees. This is the beating heart of the plain, a place that practically hums with power. Not magical power, but physics. I would not like to imagine the plane of metal without this power source. While the plane of metal is full of many metallic life forms, there are three primary society-forming peoples. The Zura are genies of metal, known to be bold and imposing showmen, but standoffish in relating to others. Mercurials are metal elementals known for their creative drive. They build most of the cities, after all. They're also known to get bored quickly, often changing their appearance, name, and personalities to take on new persona. And finally, we have the Talos, the result of mortal blood infused with elemental metal. Taloses have a natural affinity for mining, manufacturing, and tinkering with metal. Along with this affinity comes the expectation that they work in one of these occupations. An expectation some Talos resent, and other Talos thrive on. There are a few more interesting and dangerous places to explore before we finish for the day, but first, spells and items. There are 17 new spells, but I'm most interested in the 2 metal domain focus spells. The first focus spell, Serrate, is a single-action touch spell targeting a metal weapon. By pinching and pulling upon the metal, you add 1d4 slashing damage to the weapon till the start of your next turn. This damage increases every 2 spell ranks. Not a particularly powerful spell, but they can't all be. The next focus spell is Repel Metal. This is a reaction triggered when a strike with a metal weapon or projectile would hit you or an ally in the metal's 60-foot range. This spell gives the defender a +2 circumstance bonus to their armor class, and if that causes the attack to miss, it is reflected back to the attacker. The defender is then immune to this spell for 10 minutes. Repel Metal seems like it might be decently good against on-level or low-level enemies. Higher-level enemies will probably not get hit by the rebound if their strike rolls low enough to be blocked by the spell. On to items, this section specifically calls out quote-unquote morphic items and says they are almost exclusive to the plane of metal. This is not referencing any specific item trait, just the idea of a magic item being able to turn into a different kind of item. I'm pretty sure items like that have already existed, but regardless, there are only 2 such items, maybe 3 if I'm being charitable, in this section. The Morphing Weapon is an item with this shifting rune that exclusively becomes metal weapons, and admittedly has some neat in-combat exclusive reshaping effects. The Silver Snake Cane can be loaded with an elixir or poison to inject allies or foes. It also turns into a sword cane, auto-coated in any poison you may have loaded it with. And it has an ability players can't use, unless they somehow become a Zura. And finally, the Zura Gloves can cast Weapon Storm or cast Wall of Metal. Depending on the choice of the Zura the gloves are loyal to, so GM's choice. Last in the items is a whole section of metallic relic gifts. From manipulating electricity to exploiting magnetism to commanding a cloud of rust. Check them out. But as they say, forewarned is forearmed, and that means knowing about these spells and items is as good as having them, right? Right? I certainly hope so, because of the sightseeing we are yet to do, the Scouring Tempest will find you if you don't find it. This raging storm is composed of shards and flakes of loose metal, and rust whipped into frenzied motion by strong electromagnetic fields. Such is the fury of this tempest that in its wake not a speck of rust or corrosion remains. The landscape is scoured clean and shiny. Currently, efforts to model the movement and evolution of the storm have met with little success. The most reliable protection from the storm is to take shelter in a city. Most cities are sensibly constructed near large deposits of lodestone whose own magnetic field will produce a buffer against the storm. To be caught in the open or even in an above-ground structure without magnetic protection? Ugh, a shiver at the thought. There is hope, however, that the storm can one day be predicted. At its core, an armillary the size of a house spins. It is constructed of every known metal, and its motions are thought to repeat nearly every 768 years. With more information, say a more accurate recording of both the armillary's period and its patterns of motion, for instance, the storm's pathway may be predictable. Oh well. At least our last two subjects are places that won't catch you by surprise. Dakmara's Folly is a massive outcropping of metal with supposedly ancient treasure and knowledge hidden somewhere upon or within its craggy surface. So what's the catch? Why has no one retrieved these treasures? Well, my friend, Dakmara's Folly is a very particular type of metal. It is primarily composed of Sikatite. If you remember back to my presentation on sky metals, Sikatite has a very odd property. It oscillates between hot and cold at regular intervals, with a chunk as large as Dakmara's Folly cycling about every 24 hours. At its hottest, it instantly vaporizes organic material on contact, and at its coldest, it should freeze molten metal just as fast. There are only a few hours at a time of bearable temperatures between each phase. Surely no one could seek out treasure hidden on a mountain of metal and return with it in such a short time. Perhaps I've said too much. I see that look in your eye. Let's move on before you do something stupid. I know a good distraction. Do you want gold? Thousands of tons of it, free for the taking? Too bad. The gold in question is the molten contents of a tungsten volcano. Even metal elementals leave the gold alone, considering they would melt halfway up the mountainside. Besides, I lied. The gold isn't free for the taking. The heat of the volcano is suspected to emanate from a pocket of elemental fire, a suspicion supported by the fact that a cult of fire elementals make their homes and worship right up at the edge of the caldera. It does leave me wondering what kind of creature could both draw the fire elemental's reverence and survive in that environment. It seems I've made a recent habit of putting bad ideas into adventurers' heads. Oops. Today we explored the plane of metal, a wounded plane like several of the others we've explored. Next, we explore the source of many of those wounds. Next, we explore the plane of Earth. So until next time, I have been your host, the Goat King. Thank you for visiting the realm, and as always, travel with loyal companions.